Okay, so we have Paul Mamelian on Zoom and Leslie Kerr in person in the flesh. And we are sort of having an open conversation about generosity and finances and whatever else you want to talk about relating to the church budget and this theme that we have for our generosity season. When I give, I gain, and all those kinds of topics. But we're going to just ground ourselves in our discussion with a word of prayer. So let's pray. Good and gracious God, as we gather on this All Saints Day, we remember and are grateful for those who've come before us and the legacy that has been entrusted to us from the community of saints, those who've gone before. And we pray, Lord, as we discuss the future, as we discuss the present and the future going forward, that you would guide and direct our conversation, continue to give us a spirit of gratitude and generosity. Use this time for edification and for education and for renewal of our spirits. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Great. Well, we'll kick us off, and thank you for that intro, Emily. And I think our goal, mine and Paul's goal, and the finance committee, I will say, because we're just the chosen ones coming to help on behalf of finance, goal was to make this largely a discussion-based session to be able to share insights on the budget, what pledges go towards in helping sustain the church, why it's important, kind of overall financial picture, and answer any questions that you all may have. I know typically we talk about the finances of the church around once a year at the annual meeting. So we thought now would be timely to just give an open session to really understand what is it going to and what are we getting when we're giving. And I think I will just kind of initially tee it up and kick over to Paul to chime in as well. When we talked about kicking off the generosity campaign within finance committee, all of us really focused on kind of what are we getting out of what we're putting in. And as we teed up that theme of when I give, I gain. I was like, I gotta get the exact right wording there. That all of the annual pledges that come in, they fund our operating budget. And that is really what is sustaining the heart and soul of our church. I think we are overall as a church in a really solid financial position that we have almost $3 million in cash and investments. And when you see that number, sometimes the question can be like, well, what are we doing with all of that money? So a lot of that money is sitting in our investment funds, our endowment funds, our housing assistance funds, our faithful giving fund that is really there for the long-term longevity of the church. It helps go toward housing assistance is specifically set aside from the proceeds of the manse several years ago. That is really there purely for housing purposes. And then we have our endowment and faithful giving funds that are really meant to be for long-term projects. Some of that money we're using to fund the growth initiative, which is a specific initiative of the church. So when we look at that money, that's not really going towards our day-to-day operations of the church. What's funding the church and what helps finance committee plan is what everyone in the congregation pledges, and having knowing what those pledge numbers will be helps us plan versus having to rely on the non-pledged income that does come in and help supplement the operating budget. And so what goes then through that operating budget is really, it's all of the staff, it's the building, it's mission, all of the things that we're really engaging with day to day. So when I think about why I give and what I love about the church, I think that we have a fantastic staff team here. So when we think ahead to next year, how are we going to cover cost of living increases, any bonuses for Chris, for example, and the fantastic job he did while Emily was on sabbatical to really recognize and celebrate the staff. All of that comes from the giving of the congregation towards the annual operating budget. Everything that goes towards our mission, and I know mission is a huge reason why a number of members of the church are here, and it's one area of our operating budget that is it depends on what comes in. Staff and building costs are largely fixed of what we need to pay them. So depending on what increases in giving we give, that's what drives being able to increase that mission budget. So for those that are passionate about mission, that's really a huge part of being able to drive a higher budget is the contributions and pledges that we give. And then lastly, kind of that third bucket is our ministry of all of the other programs, the building, our wonderful choir, and all the things that really kind of make the church run. So that's what it means when we say we give and kind of what we're gaining from it. So let me pause there and let Paul add his 2 cents in on that kind of, why are we here? What are we talking about? And why is it important?
Thanks, Leslie. Hi, everyone. I'm in Salt Lake City at Juliet's apartment. So I thank you for letting me come in on video. Yeah, I think, what Leslie said is spot on. I mean, we have, as a finance committee, and I've been on the finance committee now for probably about a decade, we've seen the ups and downs over the years. And one of the things we are always very careful about is how we manage our budgets. And, sometimes dollars can seem fungible. But if you think about it kind of from your own, personal perspectives, and when we look at it at the church, we are in a very good position as far as Leslie indicated, for example, as far as a lot of the funds we have available, the cash we have available that we've raised over the years through some of the various campaigns, whether it was the capital campaign we did or when we sold demands and things of that sort. But as a year over year budget, our job as a finance committee, and I think what the session in the church would want us to do, is to really manage our budget to what our income is. And so if you think about it in your own personal terms, just because you have a big savings account, you probably don't want to go out and buy fancy cars and fancy houses and know that you can't sustain it over years, because all you're doing then is you're eating into your savings, and at some point that goes away. And that's one of the things we've been very careful about, is how do we manage our budget year over year. And that's where sometimes the challenge comes in, which is we have a very generous church, very generous congregation, but when our annual budget is tight, it forces us as a finance committee, and then ultimately the session as the leadership group, to make some tough decisions. And that's one of the things we'd want to avoid. We want to be in a growth outlook, think about how we grow our church, how we bring in new members, do new programs, do exciting new things, get more for us who are here in the church to have, and less worry about how are we going to make this program continue next year. And that's where, as I look at our giving, I mean, obviously the church has meant a lot to us over the years, but as each of us changes, we're going from the now where everything was about our kids over the past, say, 10, 15 years. Now we're going into a period where they're going off on their own, and what does the church mean for us? So what we look at for the church becomes different, but each person has that as they go through the various stages. And it's important for us to make sure that the church continues to be important for us and what we need, and a place where we can give back as we go through this next stage as well. So I encourage, as we talk about through this today, each of us contemplates that in our own perspective as well.
So teeing up why it's important and what it means, and some of the themes we're hitting on, a couple of things just to bring a finance lens to it that are a focus for us, that have been couple challenges over the past few years. I think while we're in a solid place and have been able to get to a balanced budget each of these past few years, two of the key challenges that we faced have been, one, just a decline in the overall number of family units that are giving. I think as folks have passed away or moved away, we have not been able to replace the number of families that are giving with the number of new members that have joined. So while the members that we do have are very generous, to Paul's point, and have been increasing their pledges, that hasn't been quite enough to close that gap. So we're focused on how we can increase giving through both the existing folks that we have, but also how we reach new members through our growth initiative, how we're getting those new folks who have joined engaged and pledging. Because one of the other kind of unique trends to that kind of cycle is that the members who passed away or moved away tend to be folks who were engaged in the church for a very long time, who are giving pretty high amounts, that then the new families that join, it takes a while to kind of build up to that same giving level. So the swap in and out, it doesn't quite balance out. So that's one of the kind of the overall trends. And I think we're doing a great job with the community engagement through the concert series and the growth initiative that work on addressing that, but that's kind of one of the continual trends that we've been facing. And the other one I would highlight, through that growth initiative, we set aside a specific budget to fund, not out of the operating fund, but out of the faithful giving fund. That was a investment approved by session, and I think there's been a ton of traction as we've pivoted that this year to really focus on music and the community. But as we started that initiative, there are certain items that are being paid out of that initiative. For example, James's salary, Sean's salary, and some of those things that are really more at this point ongoing operations of the church. But we don't have the money in the operating budget to move those over yet. So that's a big focus from the finance committee as well, is how do we grow our operating budget to a healthy place that we can sustain some of those operating items that are being paid through the growth initiative until we can really start to drive some of that growth to cover them. Paul, do you want to add anything on those 2 points?
I think that's spot on. You know, the growth initiative was fantastic in allowing us to start doing some great new programs. We brought in some wonderful staff, some wonderful new opportunities for us, but those are all intended to be kind of one-time growth initiatives. And to the extent we think they're important for us to keep going, we really need to be able to put them into our operating budget on a regular basis so that the income we have coming in, the pledges and the donations, matches the expenses we have, and not have to pull out of savings, essentially out of our funds. So that becomes a critical piece of it. And that's, I think, one of the areas that our finance committee has been looking at very carefully to see how can we get there. And a lot of that is obviously going to come back to this conversation about the annual giving, which becomes our source of income every year, and how we can actually build a budget.
So I think Tina was upping, that's really why giving, why it's important, trying to put into context what annual pledges are going to and some of the key themes that we're seeing. I'd love to see what questions folks have, if there's insights that we can help provide on either. All right, before I don't even need to keep Tina up, you're gonna take it away.
If our mission is mission, why do we put mission in, I don't want to use a conflict, but in tension with the operating budget? Why don't we fund mission out of the growth of the savings accounts, the endowment funds and things of that sort? Why are we balancing mission against the air conditioning system?
It's a good question. I do think we do contribute some to mission out of a portion of the endowment funds that were specifically tagged for that. So I think there is a little bit coming there, but by and large, the bulk is from the operating budget. I think we've constructed it that way, and then that's really kind of it's ongoing operations of the church. We are supplementing that operating budget, I would say, with income off of our savings. So there is a portion of our operating budget that is driven by distributions from the faithful giving and endowment funds, around 5% that's covering some of the operating funds. So when we look at, hey, I'm not trying to just deplete, run through my savings. We could either say, just give every year out of savings and we would erode it. We really want to focus on giving off of that income. Some of that's already factored into the operating budget, but and then some of it is earmarked from some of those funds, is how we've been thinking about it. I don't know, Paul, do you have more to add to that?
No, I think that's the important distinction, which is if we were, assuming we don't want to actually eat into the principal or of our savings, and really, if we're talking about the income that comes off of it, the interest and whatever growth it has, there wouldn't be enough there to fund the mission at the levels we've been used to funding over the years. So we've been using the income to supplement it. I think if we were to decide that we want to use some of those funds, principal, to actually fund mission, by definition, it would be there would be an end date, and that wouldn't necessarily be the right way of approaching it, I think.
What is the value of mission in the budget?
The dollar wise? We're around 38,000, 38,000. Our goal has been to try and anchor the mission budget to 7% of the operating. Sorry, 7% of pledges. So that as we see pledges go up, that's the challenge. As people increase their pledges, there's a number of other increases that you've got to fund, but trying to anchor towards that 7% of pledges, that if people like yourself who are passionate about mission, we give more, we can then give more to mission.
So Paul, are you saying we can't spin off $38,000 from a $3 million endowment? It seems like a mismatch in numbers.
You're saying out of the principal or out of the income?
No, not out of the principal. It's just basically the return on the investment. So if we maintained a 3 million, I'm just picking a number 3 million because it was used earlier. The growth in that 3 million or the dividends or interest or the whatever is certainly more than $38,000.
Yes,
While not eroding the principal. And if we're in a period of declining giving units and changing the demographics of the giving units from big to smaller, seems like we're fighting an uphill battle without rethinking how the funds are allocated.
And we do, I'd say we are using, and I have to look at the exact numbers of the total amount there, the income that we're peeling off every year from that like kind of 3 million cash and investment base, it is going towards different things. So it's not just that it's sitting there and then we could pull 38,000. We're distributing it to help with some supplement the operating. And then two, there's a number of restrictions on how some of those funds can be used from the various endowments that are going to specific purposes around there's a lot around music. Some does go towards mission, and then some has gone to things like women's retreat or other events within the church. So I think we can certainly evaluate it as we're looking at how we'd want to allocate the total amount that's approved for distribution. But say in general session is approving, hey, endowment committee's recommendation is typically 4 to 5% of the funds that we can distribute from each year. How do we want to allocate that across various purposes?
Yeah, total from
Yeah, I
the
think-
funds combined is 47,000 that we're taking.
Yeah, I think the 3 million is, as Leslie pointed out, some of it's restricted to different areas. We do use all of the income that's coming in either to supplement the budget, because without that we'd also forget about the mission part, we'd be short on some of the just basic operating piece as well. But a significant portion of it then comes out, and that is actually funding already the mission programs as well. So to go further into our funds would be depleting the principal at that point, but it may be worth looking at to see if there's a better way we separate those out. But at the end of the day, it's basically the same dollars. I mean, we're taking all the income and we're using it. So if we put it all towards mission, then we have to supplement the operating income somehow otherwise.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point, John, if I heard your question correctly, your example was, how do we look at mission dollars versus an air conditioning unit? And I just want to make the observation, the air conditioning unit and long-term assets like that do not come out of the annual fund. Those do come out of the investments. So that's one of the reasons that we have all those long-term assets, investment assets, trying to match up with long-term needs. Whereas mission is more short-term, annual, matching up with short-term revenue.
Agreed. My question is kind of like, if we have $3 million and then we got a reasonable 5% return on that, that sounds to me like there's $150,000 of growth money that's available to do something with, whether it's restricted for music or whatever, or goes into the long-term maintenance budget for the building. It just seems to me that it's larger than $38,000. So I'll get off that point.
And I think that's where that 3 million number is probably not the right one to look at, because the actual distributions that come out of the endowment, the housing, and the faithful giving is in total for the year $47,000. So the 3 million is other pieces that you're looking at as well. I'd have to, I don't have the balance sheet in front of me as to what else is in that 3 million you're looking at.
But we need to think about inflation as well. So I mean, that takes up 3% of that 4 or 5% a year just to stay here.
Yes. But
Yeah, as we give, so shall we gain. Do we have objectives of what we're trying to gain specifically, or are we just talking in general?
like a financial dollar target that we're trying to hit for.
Or what results from the financial dollar, which is what you
Mhm.
started off talking about?
Yes, I'd say the three areas that we teed up around when we gain it really, and what we're driving from operating is our staff. We want, like, our goals would be to continue to drive increased giving, that we can retain our fantastic staff and give them the right cost of living, pay adjustments that they deserve. That all comes from the increases that we're funding. It's our mission. So by the increases and gains that we're hoping to directly address some of the things that John is highlighting, if this is the goal of the church, how can we increase giving to continue to be mission focused and increase where we'd like to? And then it's the ministry components, making sure that the building is continuing to run and operate, stay clean, that we maintain our music programs, etc. So it's really those three things, continuing to maintain them and increase the value of those. Paul, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, and I think that's right. Part of it is each person's going to be putting an emphasis on a different portion. Some may value the music more, some may value mission more, some may value the youth programs more. The reality is our church is made up of all those different components. And we have to be looking at the entire piece of it, and to say, well, we're going to fund this one area at the expense of another. Obviously, we may be ostracizing certain people in the church who put more value there. So putting all that together, but each person, and I think that's why, you know, we do this every year, and Emily's done a great job of this year, bringing people in to say, what does this mean to me? Different families, why the church is important, why PPC is important, why I give. For each person is a kind of a personal decision as to why they do that, but seeing that the growth and what you get out of the church and what you put back into it, I think is part of that decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one question, I have a couple of questions, but I'll just ask this one. I think the growth initiative that you referred to, particularly the music program part of it, I mean, I think is excellent. I mean, I think it's wonderful. And certainly in no small measure to the talents of Sam in that regard. I mean, well, I know this comes out of some of the endowment, but today's service was outstanding and the music that was wonderful with it. And the concert series and so on. And my question on the concert series is that, to what degree is the concert series, from a cost point of view for the people that we have, supported from ticket sales versus what we use, I guess, from endowment in certain cases to support that, roughly speaking? Just as a rough order percent, what roughly speaking on a percentage basis is that self-funded, so to speak?
Do you want me to talk
Yeah,
about
I was like, I don't have
the concert series is coming from the growth initiative. So when we are paying for these groups to come, most specifically the Wildwoods last month, and then Brian Ang
Yeah.
the month after, in September, October, the money that we paid the talent came from the growth initiative, and then the sales of tickets, if it breaks even, then it goes, you know, we break even. If we make a profit from ticket sales, then whatever profit there is goes to mission.
Oh, okay.
And the mission committee designates what mission organization that will go, the proceeds, the profits from those ticket sales. That's how it's been arranged for this fall concert series.
Okay. Or maybe you don't really have handy that number, but I would be curious on roughly percentage, which is what the ticket sales or, you know, that kind of income provides versus what the, you know, for a year's worth of concert series or whatever, and what we're paying out of the growth initiative. It'd be interesting to know what that was.
Yeah.
I think we can maybe take that as a takeaway for when we brief out at the annual meeting,
Yeah,
and
that would be
an
great.
update on the growth
That'd
initiative.
be
Hey,
great.
here's the
I know
total
people are
amount.
interested in it. I mean, I love that program, by the way. I love all of the music that we have during worship and so on. And in particular, I think Sam's done a wonderful job with the help of the folks in the church and so on. But I love the concert series. I would just be, from a financial point of view, interested in roughly that breakdown. One other quick question I had also was on the endowment funds. I know you've mentioned this before, I'm sure, I just don't remember what it was. But again, broadly speaking, the $3 million, to take that as a number. What is the yield? And roughly speaking, what is the spread between, if you will, stock assets versus fixed income assets that it's distributed across as far as investments are concerned?
So a couple updates, and I'm going to call on some of my endowment committee friends that are here. So we generally target around 60-40 equity fixed income split across the funds. We did earlier this year bring on a new investment advisor that has taken over, like, fully managing those funds for us. So they're in their kind of ramp up period of buying in over time to reinvest those funds. But I think so far they've been doing a really fantastic job. And I think once we get through a first full year with them, then we can start reporting out some more kind of like full view on the yield numbers. But I'll see if you guys, I don't know off the top of my head the latest yields, but I don't know if either any of my fellow endowment committee members here have anything else.
You're absolutely correct. It's been roughly, and for many years, a roughly 60-40 targeted equity share. So equity and so it's been roughly in that range. And so, yeah, and then equity markets have been up over 15% through the last 4 years, although in 2022 it was down pretty sharply, but it's been an incredible run for equities the last 8 years.
Yes, sorry. Go here first, because I know you've been trying to ask a question.
Because when I think of church, I think of our church mission, music, and our staff. That to me is the core. But as was mentioned in the sermon this morning, we have existed now for 60 years. And what about the maintenance of the actual building? I know a few years ago we had a parking lot built, we've had fencing. So how do you project what the needs are for the maintenance or the expansion of the building?
Yep.
The physical property.
Yes, so there's some the kind of like routine things like, custodian, utility bills, just like general maintenance and upkeep. All of that's funded from the operating budget, and we plan for that working with property committee. But those bigger expenses, the true capital items of, hey, my HVAC is out, I need to replace that. We need a new roof, we need new windows. That all comes from investment funds, and we work closely with the property committee to understand over the next 5 years what are your kind of the big things coming up. So we just went through over the last 5 years or so, we just replaced all the HVACs. I think we have nine.
Yeah, I don't think they were all replaced, but several.
Several HVACs. We have 9 different units in the building to cover all of the different areas. So some of that is ongoing, and we work closely with the property committee to understand over that long term what the needs are, and to the extent there are any larger dollar items, then working with the endowment committee as well to make sure we're planning for that and how we're thinking about.
So do you have like a 10-year projection of building?
The property committee has gone out 5 years is the most that I've seen. I don't know if you have more to add to that.
Well, just to pick up on your question, as Leslie alluded to, different investment funds have differences. And one of the main funds is the Firm Foundation Shining Future residual from the capital campaign of 2013 or whatever it is. And as I recall, there was about $500,000 put into reserve, which because of the benefit of the investment performance has grown to, I want to say roughly 900,000 now. And so it's that particular fund to be consistent with the objective of the capital campaign that's used for capital expenditures like HVAC, et cetera. But it's also why we're sensitive about inflation, because we all know that all these things get more and more expensive each year. So we have to maintain the purchasing power of the funds, and in particular that one. But that's where that money would come from, and it's a pretty ample amount for the future, recognizing there will be unknown things that come up.
We should feel comfortable
Yes.
with structure that we live in.
If I may, I think, and I suspect it's probably other questions I'll see, but if I may, actually, I want to just touch on that because I think that's a good point, kind of what we're talking about, which is from a financial position overall for the church, we're in good shape. So as far as questions like that, Susan, as far as do we have the funds if the roof needed to be replaced or some catastrophic thing happened that we needed some major amount, we are actually in relatively good shape because we have done a good job over the years, whether it's different campaigns, reinvesting the funds we had from the sale of the manse or when we retired the mortgage on the church and such. So some of that's in good shape. So I think from a long-term perspective, we can all feel pretty good. It's that annually, every single year, how do we fund our operating budget? That if we don't get the pledges to keep up, we have two choices. Either we have to dip into our savings and take away funds from some things like that, or reduce the amount we spend every year, which means obviously we're shrinking something in our church, different programs, staff, things like that. And that's where my biggest concern continues to be, which is our giving keeping up with the needs and the growth of our church? And one of the things I'll throw out here, you all know that I tend to be somewhat frank. Our average household giving in our donations and our annual giving is about $4,000. So if you think about it from a tithing perspective, right? So the average household income in Montgomery County broadly is about $150,000. In Potomac, average household income is about $300,000. Now, obviously, everybody's in a different place, but even if you start using some of those numbers, and even if we want to be practical, economical, and say, well, let's use after-tax dollars, obviously the government takes its share first. In any event, if somebody's tithing, we're talking somewhere between, say, $10,000 or $20,000 a year, but our average pledge is $4,000. Part of what happens, I think, is, and many of you may do the same thing, every year when we talk about let's increase our giving, somebody looks at what did I give last year? Let me give a little bit more. And if you've done that now for 5, 10 years, it may not have kept up with either where you are or where inflation is or what our church's needs are. And so one of the things I've really been encouraging people, and it's a tough conversation to have because not everybody wants to have these conversations, is kind of resetting, looking again at where you are and whatever. If you've been giving some number, can you give not just 10% more, but can you really reset? If you were to give, let's go, twice as much, would you be able to do that? And I think pushing ourselves and stretching ourselves is where it's going to allow us to really get that operating budget that we can build here. Can we add the staff members we need? Can we bring on the programs we need? As opposed to trying, we've been doing a great job financially managing everything, but really having that flexibility for Emily, the staff, the session to be able to do new initiatives, new programs, really has to come from all of us, not just keeping up with inflation every year, but significantly looking at and saying, can I do more? So, I would say, as I've had this conversation with colleagues and friends, which is, if you were to double your pledge, can you still manage? For many of us, the answer may be yes. For many, it may be no. And obviously, that's a personal decision each of us has to make. But I really encourage us to think differently about how we set our pledge every year. Because if we can get some significant increases, it gets us there. One of the examples I've used is when we did the capital campaign years ago. Cindy and I had a number in mind. I guess it's been over 10 years since we did it. We had a number in mind. And then we had these, small sessions where we all got together and discussed. And as either the campaign consultant, the campaign leaders, or even at that time, our pastor started talking about what they were contemplating, and they were being all very honest about their numbers. I realized, oh, wow, what I thought was kind of the target was not right. We should give a whole lot more. And we ended up giving, I think, 3 times as much as we had actually originally contemplated. Now, some of that is just, if you have the means to do that, that's how I think we're going to be able to sustain this. So I really encourage everybody to look carefully and think about, can I do significantly more than I've done so that we can actually grow these things? So I'll get off my soapbox on that. And since I'm far away, you guys can't all get that mad at me right now.
We're Those are the kind of specifics that would help us think it through.
Of, like what dollar amount individuals should be targeting.
Yeah, or what's the shortfall and what would be the average increase to get
Needed.
to that? Now, I have not gone through all the literature I just got in the mail yesterday, but hopefully some of that's in there.
Maybe we need to work on that.
Yeah.
And, I think that's a good suggestion.
I mean, along
And I
those
think, you
same
know,
lines.
I can wait. Yes, I know. I was like, I keep trying to call in. Yeah. Okay, so go Gail first and then Paul, and then we'll come back.
Well, first I wanted to say thank you, because I know this is not a fun thing, maybe it's a fun thing to do when you're working with the numbers, but to have these conversations, it's difficult, and thank you both for doing it and for your perspectives on it. And then I wanted to add one thing and then ask another. I think an example of the firm foundation funds in the capital funds were, you know, we redid the kitchen not long ago. At least it still seems like not long ago, you know, a number of years ago. And that is the type of thing that fund. And so there is an importance to making sure that it's going to continue to be available and keep up with inflation. The question I was going to ask was about the housing fund, and it might be helpful to recap what the housing fund is intended for and why we have it. So,
Yes. Yes, so the housing,
because if we're lumping the whole 3 million together, it sort of loses.
you skew it.
It skews it, and it's hard to understand, but if you could understand, some of this was capital, some of this was housing, and so.
Yeah, so the housing assistance fund is about 500,000 of that 3 million. And what that fund represents is the proceeds from the sale of the manse that we took and have been reinvested. And that money has been restricted in the event that there is a new pastor in the future. I think that we need to then purchase essentially a new manse. So there's some type of housing item where that fund is kind of sitting there specifically for that purpose. I will say this year, we did make a shift that we are using a small portion of the income from that housing assistance fund to help supplement the operating budget to go towards specifically the housing portion of Emily and Chris's salary. So we're starting to use it a little bit to help supplement from that perspective versus just having it sit there.
Right. That was part of the original intent, is we knew we might use it in some way, but it was specifically for the housing of the ministers.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it just made sense to use it for that purpose because otherwise it's sitting there and it's great to reserve it for a future minister, but you know, we've got ministers now that need, you know, that's part of their compensation, so it seemed the right place to use it.
Can I just add to that? When the congregation voted on the sale of the manse, it was with a condition that
That's
the
right. I remember
excess proceeds after the payment of the mortgage be set aside specifically for a pastor who 25, 30 years from now will succeed Emily.
I'm not sure it was set aside for that part, that it was set aside
I
for
was being
minister
funny.
housing, which means that I don't believe it was set aside that it had to be the next minister. It would be allocated.
It had to be
specifically.
available because, you know, like we read in the paper all the time, it's difficult for people to move into this area and for housing. And you can't attract, Emily was a very different situation because she was comfortable commuting and she didn't live all that far away, except on busy traffic mornings, probably seems it.
Oh.
But, you know, to get
So just
the
to-
person you want to come in here, and there's a church in the church to provide answers, so.
Yeah, Greg, I remember
But it
that.
was a condition.
Yeah, I was just thought it would be helpful to reiterate that piece of the 3 million is specifically allocated for assisting with our minister's housing.
Thank you for calling that out.
Thank you.
But you say it sits there, I
Being
mean,
invested.
that there's
It's
growth.
invested.
It's being
Yes,
It's
invested.
growing.
Yeah,
It's
the-
invested.
I mean, it's a
Let
truly,
me say about the growth, the proceeds were $370,000. At the time it was sold, I don't even remember what that was, 6, 7 years ago. And it's grown to north of, I think it's like 540 now, something like that.
Good group.
Yes. Okay, real quick, Paul, did you have something else? And then we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're good. Okay, no. I know. Oh,
Quick question though.
What's the volume amount of, I don't know what the right term is, legacy funds that we received from former members that have passed?
That's the endowment.
That, in other words, is there an ongoing contribution to that?
of people adding new money into their endowment funds.
Yeah,
Yes, so I'd say there's a couple of different categories. Maybe I'll put them in two categories. We have memorial funds that generally don't have as much restrictions as the endowment funds that are meant to be a little bit more short term. And then we have endowment funds that named endowments are very restricted in their purposes. So for the memorial funds, Emily works very closely with those families to try and spend that money. The intention would be within a year or two of it coming in to either put it towards some special one-time purpose, or if not, try and move it over to like Faithful Giving Fund or one of the funds where we can have more general access to it. So Emily kind of closely works with them on that, and that little bits can come in. I think if anybody was to put like donate in memory of me, that's typically where those type of funds would go to. And then on the endowment side, there are some of the named endowments where families are contributing on a recurring basis. It kind of depends endowment by endowment, but there are some where they're putting in every year.
and they're all restricted.
Yes.
Leslie,
Mhm.
let me pick up on that. I can't help it. I'm sorry, but as a former chair of generosity, the legacy giving has been disappointing. And in part, I know several folks that were involved in conversations, but at the time it was decided to raise funds for the organ, really sort of low-keyed the legacy giving, people remembering the church in their estate plans, and remember the Steeple Society, where folks who remember the church in their wills and then tell us that they're doing that, they're members of the Steeple Society, and there are probably 15 families that are part of that right now. But there's not been a lot of robust giving from folks who have passed away. And I would encourage each one of you all, and many of you may have the church in your wills, but just not thought to mention, gee, I should be in the Steeple Society. But it really is an opportunity to match up one-time giving from your long-term estate development. But it's something that we need to be talking about here because it's really an opportunity lost. And it gets back to the point that Chris made in the sermon about, you know, passing along and becoming responsible as, you know, the generation before all of us in this room has moved on. We have to fill their shoes and their level of giving, and the folks behind us have to step up. You know, otherwise you can't replace dollar for dollar.
Is that in the material that's mailed out, or is it just operating by?
The
Discussion of Steeple.
the Steeple Society, I don't think that was included in
Not for
the
generosity, that's sort of separate. We're
Yeah.
thinking we'll maybe do an emphasis in the spring on legacy giving.
Okay.
And I think-
It is easy to do with a simple codicil. I will mention.
I think I heard Chidi try and chime in with a question, so let me go there.
Yes. Hi, yeah, apologies, couldn't be there. Quick question though for Leslie and Paul. Given the projection that church attendance is likely to drop, therefore giving units will drop, and what are the thoughts on having alternate sources of funding though? Are we not there yet, or can we start thinking about that? Because right now, you know, we're pushing the same units, you know, asking for more, but can we look at other alternate sources at this point? And I can, one thing that comes to mind could be grant writing. So is it feasible to bring in someone who would write grants, and the grants would be dedicated to the church's missions? And that could be, you know, that could lift burdens, from the operating budget?
Yes, it's a good question. I would say over the years, we have periodically gotten some small grants on a one-off basis to help supplement. So I think that's certainly an area we could keep exploring more if there are other opportunities. And there have been other places, one-off, like for example, during COVID, the church did get two paycheck protection loans through the SBA program that helped supplemented income because we kept the staff on during the full pandemic period. So as there are opportunities like that, we're actively trying to take advantage of those. But I think we could certainly look into it a bit more and see if there's other places that we might be able to pull in.
Okay, yeah, that helps. And so if we have someone whose job is just grant writing, so that job will be based on how much comes in, and that could
Yeah.
that could help.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Charlie, did you have one more question?
Yeah,
And then
I have
we're
one
gonna
more
wrap up?
question. Another way to look at this is if you had a target budget and you knew you had so many giving units last year,
Mm-hmm.
but as you stated, some have died, moved away, whatever. For the remaining giving units, on average, what would that increase need to be to match the target budget? Have you done that calculation?
Sort of, right now, if we had the same as last year, we would be $30,000 less, $30,000 less.
To just
Everyone
stay
gave the
flat
same.
before
If everyone gave the
from
same
just the
that they
people
gave.
who've left, but then we also need to fund increases for, cost of living, all of that. So
Yeah,
really, we're
so
talking.
I'm really looking for, once you establish the new target,
Mhm.
what's the percentage increase on
Per
average
person, yeah.
for the remaining giving units?
Mm.
That'd be
Yeah.
useful.
And how many giving units were last year?
83.
Yes, yeah, we can do that calculation. I know we've, Melissa, our bookkeeper, has done a first pass at a budget for next year. So I think we can take that input and do exactly what you just.
Which is very flat to last year. It's
Mhm.
not.
Didn't add the extra.
But also the budget right now contemplates pulling out of some of our funds to be able to sustain our operating budget. And so if we were able to increase pledges to not have to do that enough. So, one part is can we get back to flat? One part is can we increase it to not have to use some of those funds, because then the funds can actually go towards some of the other initiatives and not have to just sustain the operating budget. So it depends again on what we want to look at. Kind of back to what I said earlier, our church has done a good job year over year of increasing to be able to maintain more or less what we've had, with some small cuts here and there. But to be able to grow and to do new things, it's going to require us to substantially go above where we've been in the past. And so, look, a couple of years ago, we said we needed to do it. We encouraged everybody to contemplate. I forget what the numbers were, 8% increase, I think, something like that, which was a pretty big increase. But the reality is, all that's done is kept up with inflation. And so if we're talking about something big enough to be able to really supplement our budget, to be able to do new initiatives, not have to pull out of our savings, it really has to be some significant increases. And only each person can decide what's right for them. But just by keeping up with inflation, it doesn't get us there at the end of the day.
So grateful, Paul and Leslie, for your time, your wisdom, your wrestling with these numbers for many, many years. As Paul said, about a decade, for Leslie, probably half a decade. And faithful on the finance committee, faithful on the endowment committee, faithful of thinking about, how can we make this a vibrant place for all of us? So thank you so much for hearing.
Hey, Emily, I'll give it a little next week.